Greetings. So there was one thing in particular that I forgot to cover in that last video. So we're talking about the cycles, the turning, if you like, and the question is, to what extent can we think of there being a cycle in the prenatal? And I think it's pretty obvious why the postnatal has this kind of karmic cycle based upon chasing after objects. You can think of them just as being mind objects, because that's fundamentally what they are. So we get something held in memory. In this case, the line here on the inside of the arrangement is the past, and attempting to find it in the future out there. So this is an outwardly directed type of orientation. You could say a conscious orientation towards objects. We associate objects in the mind with phenomena in the world, and we go chasing after it. And that's not necessarily bad. How would life function otherwise, right? But obviously there are some problematic aspects to it. Life is, after all, a rather difficult thing. There's a lot of suffering in it. That is the impetus for the Buddha developing his understanding. It's the recognition that life fundamentally involves suffering. And so this is the wheel of suffering, the wheel of samsara, if you like. And it's pretty obvious, and if you go to the previous video, it's described in some great detail how it goes around and around. And the thing that I did do in the last video is discuss the possibility that as you're going around and around the postnatal, what's really happening is prenatal. And so there is a story in the prenatal. And you could say that fundamentally this is a evolutionary story. You could say that the postnatal is a revolutionary story in the sense that it goes around and around. And so this is sort of like the thermodynamic process of energy being converted into an unusable state and that being a drama for the beings who are attached to a particular energy configuration, because it keeps slipping away. Right? The thing that we're most attached to keeps slipping away for us, and that's why as you look at societies and even species, the thing that they rely upon slips away from them and they have to innovate. So in the context of the individual or of the species, that is a trial, a tribulation. It involves suffering because you're being deprived of the thing that you're used to, and you have to find something else, and it just ain't quite the same. It's sort of like the music when you grow up, you know? You become attached to it. It has a certain resonance with you because you have felt its sensation, right? And you remember it. And you kind of want more of it because it was a good feeling, right? And so you replay it, right? And it forms an ever more present kind of image, symbol in your mind where you're tying together those past experiences with something in the future. You know, for those of us who really got the music bug, like myself, this is what it was all about. We were chasing after some kind of an imprint that we got from the music that we fell in love with, right? But it never quite was the thing that we were chasing after. There would always be a certain type of deflation feeling after your closest brush with what it was. Maybe at some point I'll make a video about that in specific, because I had some pretty close brushes with the music world. And so it turns into a dissolute type of thing, where it's just like, well, live for today. You know, That's not a good way of saying it, because this is really more like it is the idea of bringing something that you're experiencing into the future, but it comes about after the context of this emptiness. So you're trying to fill the void. It's like sort of, the hungry ghost phenomena, where you feel the emptiness, and so you go running for something to fill it. Right? And you think that's going to solve it because it's joy. But one of the interesting things is that in Chinese medicine, joy is considered a attribute of the fire element in five-element theory, and it has a positive-negative association. There's some debate in the Chinese medicine world about the traditional concept of emotions being an example, an indicator of some kind of fundamental imbalance. But even joy would be considered a kind of imbalance. So we have the party attitude because of the feeling of emptiness. That's the result of the overall materialistic process. I realize I'm going through this cycle again, and what I wanted to do is go through the prenatal, but it's worth revisiting. And then we have this moment of realization where it all comes down on us, you could say. It's like the hangover from the party, right? So there's your cycle, the cycle of suffering, the samsara. And what I did in the last video is I associated it with this prenatal and said that what we think we're experiencing on the individual level is really this, I'm going to say, evolutionary process. And so what is the story in the prenatal? This is what I did not do last time. Well, it's that a state of fundamental emptiness. Now remember that on the inside here, we have the future line now. And so the future is within, right? So the state of absolute receptiveness brings about potential for the future. Why? Because the state of absolute receptiveness is open to heaven. It's open to the Tao. It's open to the way things really are. What is the word that Ken Wheeler uses? It is the Greek word anake. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. That it cannot be any other way. So instead of the idealized images that we hold within the mind of how we want things to be, this holds heaven in highest regard, which is the way things are, the way things will be, the way things have been. It is I am that I am, Yod He Vav He, right? It is the unification of time, the isness of being. And so we're receptive to that. And that creates the potential for future, right? And that future is connected to a past. What is the past? It's always heaven. The whole thing is about devotion to heaven, devotion to the divine, devotion to God, devotion to something beyond the individual ego sense of self, devotion not to this, right? Not to the individual ideas that we have and the aspirations and desires and suffering of life, but rather devotion to this, devotion to the process of evolution, the thing which actually occurs. And so there's great joy to be found in that. This would be the positive version of joy, because you're serving, this is serving the thing in the future that you don't know is coming, but you know that there's the potential for it. You have faith that things will fundamentally be put in order. And I know that might be hard to believe from the standpoint of those of you who are distraught by what's going on around the world, and honestly, I am distraught too about what's going on. But on some very basic level, if we were to stand back from the whole mess, we would have to recognize that it has to turn into a mess before something new can come into being. That's the thing about cycles. That's the thing about the evolutionary cycle, right? There is a disintegration process that's involved in all material configurations. And that's just a fact. So we can dream about it being some other way as much as we like. And maybe there could have been things that would have been done differently, different decisions made. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what the decisions are. At some point or another, whatever the form is, it's going to fundamentally erode and will have to give itself up in order for something new to come into being. So that's the whole thing, cycle of civilizations, right? It's that four-phase process, which actually, this is something very interesting. The diagrams. What are the diagrams representing? Well, you could say that, you know, the old thing about, I'm gonna take the gender out of it. Usually it's spoken in terms of men, but really when it comes down to it, you'd say, strong people make good times here. Right? Good times make weak people. Weak people make bad times. Bad times make strong people. Now, in that way of formulating this, times has to do with the configuration of the material world. So a thing that we would enjoy, right? We could say that, I'm not sure which position would be which. I don't know that it really matters, but I think that for the purposes here, you could say the times are on top, obviously. Okay, so it does matter, right? Yang, if that's the good, we'll say things are holding together in the material, but the people have become weak. Right? So here, the people have become strong, even though times are rough. So what is this? This is the relationship between a conscious being and its environment. It's describing the thermodynamic cycle. It's the basic pattern of existence. There's another thing here that I'll show you briefly. This is from one of the papers that I've written up on Medium. It's called A Metaphysical Model for a Conscious Universe of Timeless Physical Change. And this is the basic kind of model that I think is worth considering. We have conscious beings, and we have the phenomena within which they exist. So you have the observer, and you have the observed. The interaction between the two is energy. Sense comes in from the observed to the observer. The observer mobilizes actions that influence the observed, right? Now, I think that from Ken Wheeler's point of view, all of this would sort of be one thing, which is magnetic phenomena that form from the dielectric that consciousness instantiates. He doesn't really say that consciousness instantiates it, but it's like if you combine his metaphysical work with his electromagnetic work, it seems like it's irrefutable. I've tried asking him this a few times, but he's totally ignored me so far. So there's probably a good reason why he won't make that connection. He's probably smarter than I am. He's definitely smarter than I am. So I'm ignorant enough to suggest that this might be what it is that we're talking about. So if we think about that as the basic model, let's go back here and take a look at this. So these would be the four phases of that relationship between consciousness, the observer, and the phenomena, the observed. So when consciousness has it right, even in difficult, when the observed is unfavorable, where you don't like the environment, what's going on, then things can be put right. You can make it into, if you got it right? If you have an understanding, if you're in line with the Tao, if you're following heaven, right? If you have faith in God, and you apply yourself diligently to your understanding, and the efforts are in line with that understanding, then on some level, it's not like you're going to get what you want. You're not going to turn the world into what you want it to be. But you can make the best of it. And so this would be firm understanding with the world as best as it can be. That might not be very good at certain points in time. So that would maybe be another interesting video. And if any of the subjects that I mentioned for a video strike you as being something interesting you'd like to hear about, please drop me a note and say, hey, yeah, I'd like to hear that one, and I'll do it next. Because I think I've said a number of times, yeah, maybe that'll be another video. I'm not exactly keeping a list of that, and I don't know if I'll remember them all. So if something seems interesting to you, then let me know. So it may not be the best of worlds that we can put together, but it would be the best within the context of what's going on, where we happen to be within this larger cycle. Right? Because I would say that even in the worst of situations where you'd say weak people make bad times, the potential for this still exists in some small way. Like even the people who were in concentration camps, work camps, and the gulags, right? The worst of all possible circumstances, those who had this inner strength. And remember, the future is within, right? So the future is within. We're talking about here, this inner line. And I also want to point out, yang, 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 right? So on the way up, it's all a connected conception of future, right? This is the initiating point from the root of emptiness. And that initiation continues all the way to heaven until the new thing comes into being, because this is an evolutionary process. Evolution means that there is spiral development. It doesn't go around and around in a circle. It's not revolutionary, right? Because every revolution ends up with the same horrible freaking overlords, just different bodies, different people. I mean, and it can actually be worse each time around, right? So, was Tsarist Russia worse than Stalinist Russia? I think by any objective measure, the Stalinist period was worse. But I don't know. I wasn't there. Maybe I'm wrong. The serfs had it pretty rough under the czars. I'm sure there was a fair amount of brutality, but we're talking about millions of people driven from the land and killed under Stalin. I don't think it was quite that bad. So each time around, when there's a revolution, it's like everyone is rebelling against because it's based upon what they want. Okay? But in this instance, we're not talking about revolution. We're talking about evolution. It's based upon isness. What the universe wants, you could say. But wanting is probably not the right word for the universe. What the universe is producing. And so new things are forever coming into being by grace of God. And so you could say that within this model here, the relationship of the observer to the observed, this fundamental cycle is occurring all the time. Here's observer and observed in concert with each other, right? Here is an observed that looks good, but it's kind of rotting on the inside. Consciousness has lost its way, and now it's hell. Consciousness has lost its way, and the circumstance sucks, right? Consciousness has found its way again, even though things suck. But that's what brings it about to another period, another golden age. So this might be kind of like a yuga cycle as well. You can think of that basic pattern here we're talking about. And so this is the specifics within that of the operations of the mind in time in relation to that. So here it is, envisioning the future, right? Regardless of where you are on the four phases, this is a fundamental aspect of evolutionary development, right? And being able to remember it and maintain that sense of that future. And then it starts to arise in the present. What is it that's still missing here? The past. The past is empty. It hasn't quite been fully established, right? So this new thing that was originally just a foreshadowing, it sets up residence within memory, and it's still a foreshadowing. And then hints of it start to appear. but it hasn't fully established itself, because in order to be rooted in the past, it has to have the past. And now it's actually there. So here, the potential has been turned into something real for the first moment, because you have that middle line in the present. So it actually now exists. But it doesn't quite have enough history behind it. Its legs have not yet been able to bear the weight of its potential. Now it's really here. It's become part of what actually is. It's been sanctioned by God, if you like. It follows the Tao. And so then it can continue on the basis of what has been established. But already it's sort of lost that sense of future. It's like moments of realization where everything comes together and you have this brilliant sense of things. And in the next instant, it's sort of like something has been lost. It's just a memory now that you're kind of replaying. It was like an awesome inspiration a moment ago, but now you're just kind of replaying the inspiration, which isn't bad, right? An inspiration cannot last forever because the spirit is instantaneous, right? We don't have access to it forever, and in the process of evolutionary development, it's an impulse. It's a perturbation, a field perturbation, as Ken Wheeler would say. So once the field perturbation has been established, well, then it has its cycle, its life cycle, right? The thing has been established. We don't need to have a new thing. We're going to work on this thing for a while. And so in the process of it eating itself, you could say, so this is past here on the top, present. So there's nothing new coming in. It's kind of eating itself. And this, I think, is maybe what Wheeler would be talking about in terms of returning to the inertia. It's where it has to fold back in on itself. And you have the centripetal return to counter space. So what that means is that, in essence, you're eating the past. And it becomes the flow of... It's a fait accompli here, right? Until eventually it's just a memory. So there's your evolutionary life cycle. You know, when it's a memory, the next stage is emptiness. Because here's stillness, right? It's done. It had its potential that was eventually realized in actuality, and then that thing had its own natural life cycle, which undermined its past, and eventually there was nothing left but the past. In essence, a memory of it, which is a form of template. That's why mountain is associated with metal in the 5-element theory, and metal, of course, is structural. It's where everything lines up, but it's kind of dead in a certain sense. It doesn't have its own... the form has been cast. The die has been cast. And so it's like all of the things that are now inanimate. It's kind of what metal is an overall representation of. I'll have to do a 5-element video at some point or another too, because it's a very useful way of thinking about natural processes. So it's within the context of when you take a look at the things where the life cycle is complete. So let's say wood that has been cut from the tree, or a rock. Right? It was at one point molten lava, perhaps. Right? Or at one point it was perhaps atoms spit from a star. And then it kind of goes through its various forms and it ends up this relatively inert, right? So it's gone back to this inertial state in counter space, and it becomes something that's fixed. So everything that comes into being, all the isness that has a life within it, it goes through the process, it ends up in stillness that is sort of a foundation for the next go-around, you could say. So this is a more, you could say, objective view of phenomena than what happens here. This is a more subjective, ego-oriented, the shit's happening to me. This is more like, well, this is the shit that's happening to everyone. We're all going around and around like that. And as far as the mental states go, well, within every moment is the potential for all of these things. Because heaven is fundamentally time unified. It's a unity. Counter space is non-dimensional. And so there is no time within that domain. And counter space is, 0 point, the locus of the spirit, right? Spirit is the treasure of the mind. Mind is the ruler of the body. Spirit is the treasure of the mind. So mind, ruler of body, somewhat like observer. Which one is it? This one? Observer, ruler of observed. It's the observer that takes the bad times and turns them into good times. Right? So, consciousness is the formatter of phenomena. When consciousness is misguided, aberrant, distracted, not abiding by true principle, it produces bad times. So here is, having come off the good times, consciousness loses its way, it gets involved in all the various distractions and entertainments and blah, blah, blah. It's idol worshipping, involved in the simulation, not the real. As, preferring the signifier to the thing signified. I wish I could remember who said that. It's one of the, it's a quote that I think it's Feuerbach, and I think it's the quote that Guy Debord chooses for his Society of the Spectacle. One of the most amazing books. The only problem with the Society of Spectacles has no conception of prenatal. It has no sense that there is an actual divinity to existence. Other than that, it's a brilliant, brilliant book about postnatal reality. The postnatal world, let's say. Let's say that a world is from the two roots, ver and alt. So ver is like werewolf is a wolf man. So wer is man. And alt is old, right? Alt lang sein. So world, ver alt, is man old. Old man. The images created that are held onto by, what is it that it says in the Bible all the time? It says the designs of man, right? As being associated with the fall, right? The downward, descending, losing connection with real, causing there to be hell on earth, you could say. Reconnecting to the real, finding the prenatal, where the absolute is the guide, even though we don't understand it. That's the whole thing. It's built on humility. The understanding is that we don't understand. That's the basic understanding. Seeing things for what they are. That's the key to the evolutionary process. Okay, I think that's about it. I went way longer than I thought. Thank you for watching. Thank you for thinking about this. If you find it interesting, I hope you will drop me a line, pass it along to your like-minded friends, and if you're super awesome, and I'm sure many of you are super awesome even if you don't do this, you can support these efforts. Patreon.com/TaijiReality, just like the name of the channel here on YouTube. So for now, I will say adios.